好的，时间也差不多，我们现在就开始吧。那谢谢各位同学和老师参加今天的培训。那我们的培训的主题是 Bank Focus 的资料库培训。这个资料库主要提供就是很多主要银行的数据，我们等一下会演示如何搜索以及展示不同的报告等。如果遇到问题，可以在那个对话框留言，或者是等一下结束后再开语音发问，我们等一下会回答大家的问题。那么我现在就欢迎今天的主讲人 Benny。Benny 你好。
你好，你好，大家好，大家
对，
好。
现在就可以分享一下你的屏幕吧。
好的，可以啊，来我 share 一下。请问大家看到吗？
还在等，还没可以了，看到了。
看到了啊。OK， 好吧，好吧，这样可能我们现在就开始吧，好不好？
好。
OK， 好。大家好。OK， 今天我就用英文来讲解吧，这样可能是比较简单。Okay, so welcome everybody to this session that's conducted by Moody's Analytics. What we're going to be doing today is to present the Moody's Analytics Bank Focus solution. We'll explain what this solution is about, how is it being used, and also some of the interesting data points that you can find in the solution itself. So for today, we will go through, like what I said, an overview, right? An overview of the solution, the Bank Focus solution, and after that, we'll jump into the live demo. Now, you all may have questions, and I encourage you all to ask. I don't think we have a very big group today, so happy to take any questions. You can ask in Chinese if you like, right? I think, and I'll try to answer either in English or in Chinese, but feel free to ask any questions. Okay. Can I ask, is most of you are students right now? Okay, perhaps it's a bit shy. Okay, all right. Why don't I take you through, generally speaking, how Bank Focus is, right? Okay. So if you look at Bank Focus, right, what actually is used for? See, in the real world, actually, we have a lot of companies who use Bank Focus, or the kind of clients that use Bank Focus. So, for example, we have lots of banks using us. We have government agencies. So, government agencies can be central banks. Can be things like bank supervision boards, can be export credit rating agency, export credit agency as well. We have insurance company using us. We have also things like asset managers, large corporate, and a big part of who uses Bank Focus is actually the universities. So we have a large group of users from the university, from the research institutes. Okay. And typically, what they use Bank Focus is really for, the most important is actually for the FI, counterparty credit risk. So when we say FI, we are referring to financial institutions. So essentially, a bank, typically in the real world, a bank would have a relationship with other banks. So for example, let's say I use an example, Wing Lung Bank in Hong Kong may have a relationship with Citibank in USA. So if they have a relationship with each other, and if it's a business relationship, it tends to have a risk. And one of these risks is actually the credit risk of the bank. So between the two banks, they may have business dealing. So for example, they may place money in each other's account, right? Or they may have they need to accept certain guarantee from the other bank, right, as part of the business operations. So in order for them to accept those guarantees, or to ensure that the money is safe with the other counterparties, they need to do an assessment of those of that counterparties. It's just like how a bank, if they lend you money, they need to do a credit risk assessment. So a bank, before they give you a credit card, they need to do a credit assessment. Before they give you a housing loan, they need to do a credit assessment on you to make sure that you're able to pay. Likewise, a bank whose counterparty is another bank need to do a credit assessment so that any placement of funds or anything that involve money between the two banks, they know that they are safe, right? So this is what we mean by assessing the credit worthiness of the counterparties, okay? And quite often in the real world, especially in the bank, they use the bank focus data to fit into their rating model. So you all are aware of perhaps ratings by Fitch, by Moody's, by S&P, right? So these are ratings. Very often a big chunk of what drives the rating is actually the financials of the bank. So the financials of the bank drives the rating, and here we also have many clients who use the bank focus data to rate the other banks. So there is an external rating, which is like the rating given by Moody's, and there is also the internal rating, which is a rating given by a bank to another bank. Now, you may ask, why do you need to do that? Is because for the ratings, not all banks are rated by any rating agency. There'll be some banks that you are working with, they are not rated. Or you may have your own internal standardized approach to rate banks, right? So you want to follow that rating process, okay? In central banks, right? In central banks, you have a lot of people using it for banking supervision. So they need to check on the bank that they supervise, right? And they may need to conduct research on the banking sector, either on their within their country or across border. So they may want to compare the banking sector of Hong Kong versus China versus Singapore, right? So they use the data that we have in Bank Focus to do those research. Another area, corporate treasury. So corporate treasury sometimes, because they place funds, so the biggest company, they have subsidiaries all over the world, so they may need to place funds in different parts. And so as they place the funds, they need to, again, to do credit assessment, right? So this is some of the functions, right, that our clients use us for, okay? So this is just to give you an idea within the corporate world, within the external sector, what they are using Bank Focus for. Okay. Any questions from your side? Okay, that's good. No, let's move ahead. Okay. So this is diving into the products a little bit more. So Bank Focus, essentially, we have the best coverage of banks and also insurance company around the world. I think what currently the schools subscribe is the banking universe. So we have around 45,000 banks from around the world. So if you see the graph on the left-hand side, you have Latin America, you have Asia Pacific, 3 over 1,000 banks, you have EMEA, and you also have North America, about 29,000 banks, right? So we have a very, very wide coverage of financial institutions around the world. Insurance company is another module. Often the product, sometimes they are used together because there are people who are interested to research on banks, but there are also people who are interested in research on insurance company. And again, here we have a very wide coverage of insurance company. What is special about the Bank Focus solution is that we have a very specific financial template in which we call the global detail format, right? So this is, again, a template that you can use to compare a bank versus another bank. It's very detailed. And of course, the other alternative is for you to download the annual report and pull out the data yourself. But of course, that is probably not the most interesting thing to do, right? That's why the school has subscribed to the database, right, for you all to use. this is an example of how we get the data. So our primary source of data is actually annual report. So banks, they do publish the annual report. You can actually find the annual report on their website most of the time, right? So what we do is that we take the annual report and we spread them. And we spread them into essentially two different main formats. One of them is what we call the national format, and the other one is called the global detailed format. The national format, or as reported, is a very country-specific format. That means all the banks in a particular country are spread in a certain way, in the same way, essentially. So you are able to compare a bank spread in a national format of a country only within the same country. So you can compare Hong Kong Bank with another Hong Kong bank if you are looking at the national format. Because it's a national format, it means that it's extremely granular. So here you can see that we have over 2,000 line items, right? It's very detailed. But for most part, clients don't actually need to go into so deep. So we have developed another format which we call the global detailed format, and it has a bit less line item. It's about 700 over line items, right? And this means that it's easier to do your comparison for banks located all over the world. That means you can compare a bank in Singapore versus a bank in China versus a bank in Russia or India, right? Because all the line item is all harmonized and all standardized across the country. Okay, and this is the most useful template for you to have. Okay, we incorporate the CAMEL ratio. CAMELs, as you may know, is the capital, asset management, earnings, liquidity. So these are very standard assessment that banks use to assess other banks, or credit analysts use to assess banks, right? It's a CAMEL approach. Okay, and of course, besides the yearly data, we also have the quarterly financials. Okay. The other box that you can see here below is what we call the regulatory feed. And so regulatory feed is another kind. So you have the annual report, which is published by the bank. Bank very often need to submit those financials to their regulator, right? So when they submit to the regulator sometimes publish those data for somebody like Moody's to go and acquire and to input, right? So we have sources from annual report, and then we also have sources from the regulator. Okay, so these are our two main sources of data, right? We still have others, right? But I think for for most part, these two should be good enough. But maybe later on I'll explain also in the product itself, we have a third source, which is the Moody's spread. So Moody's, as you know, rate a lot of banks, and the Moody's analysts sometimes make adjustment to those financial spreads. Again, we will have those Moody's analysts adjusted spreads inside the platform as well. For university, I think what's interesting, besides just the data, is the reports. So we have published, I think every 2-3 weeks or so, we publish a bank research report, right? So this is an example of a bank research report. Essentially, our head of the data governance team will create this content, right? So he will look at the bank financials, the bank data from Bank Focus, right? And then select a theme, right? And this theme could be, in this example, you talk about things like the pandemic effect on the banking system, any regulatory relaxation. So it depends, right? These are just examples. How's the interest rate challenges within the countries? What about the funding process of banks in Asia versus banks in Europe, for example, right? So we have different research theme, which we encourage you to go and take a look, because they are there, they are free, and you can always get some inspiration on the kind of research that you wanna do. We have Excel editing tools. So some of you are a little bit more technical, right? Later we will take a look at some of the functionalities. but indeed there are some Excel add-in that you can use to, build a template to pull the data automatically. Okay, so this is the end of my PowerPoint presentation. I will jump into the product right now, and of course, if you have questions, just feel free to jump in. All right, I hope you all can see my my screen with the Bank Focus user interface. Okay. All right. I gather that you all can see, yeah, because I haven't had any response. Okay. So here, what you see is the Bank Focus interface, right? And within here, we have a few search function. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with this. Okay. So I'll explain a few key things, right? So Bank Focus, besides the data that we have of about 45,000 banks, we have a very detailed search criteria, right? I will take you through a few, but as a start, let's go in and take a look at the kind of data that we will find. So for example, I will look at HSBC Bank, right? And so when I type this in, the system will search all the entity with the word HSBC Bank, right? So in my case, I'm going to choose a PLC, which is the main bank, right? And I explain to you a few concepts here. On the left-hand side, these are the different sections or chapters, like we call it, right? The different chapters. So here you have a chapter on key information, you have a chapter on financials, you have a chapter on peer comparison or ratings or things like the shareholders and subsidiaries, right? Those are chapters. So on the right, this is where the data is. What often people look at is this, right? From here, the bank, we can tell you that this is a commercial bank. It's been around for a long time. People are often interested in this world rank and country rank. So the ranking here is based on the total assets, right? So we use total asset as the benchmark for this one. Okay. Then we give you a few highlights like net interest revenue, which is what commonly banks use, right? What's their net income? Okay. Any ratings, but let's dive into that a bit later. And here is just a quick financial profile. I will take you through a few things that I feel could be relevant for your kind of work, right? So under the identifiers, there's this thing called LEI, right? So many banks in the world has this as LEI, which is really a unique identity, right, that people use. Quite often within the product itself, we use this particular one called the BVD ID. Yeah, so this is also a way for you to look at the data. Okay. So this LEI. Okay. Now I will jump into another section, which is the accounting information. So here it's useful to know that, okay, for this particular bank HSBC, we have both consolidated and unconsolidated data, right? So a bank may produce two kind of financials, right? One is consolidated and one is unconsolidated, okay? And we have both of them here. Sometimes the bank only provide one kind of data set, which is unconsolidated or consolidated, right? So it depends what the bank is providing. The filing type is annual report. Okay. Here, I will jump into the financials. So under the financials here, you can see that there are two. One is the global detail format, and one is the national format. Okay. So the global detail format basically cover a standardized way of about 700 overlines. So like what you see here, right? We break them down, if you can see, the different sections. So go to sections, income statement, and balance sheet, right? Then you got your assets, your liabilities, and all the ratios, right? In the ratio, we arrange them in the camel process. So you got the capital adequacy, assets quality, earnings, liquidity, and funding, and sensitivity to market risk. Okay, so these are the important ratios that often you need for banking research. Okay. The interesting part is from here, if I click on this, I can see the breakdown of the financial data, right? So I can see that interest income and preferred stocks, dividend on securities is making up of all these sub-items. Yeah, right, this plus this. And if you see this sign, if you click on this, essentially allows you to go to the actual annual report, and you can see where the data 657000 comes about, right? So it's what we call a click-through functionality. Okay. In terms of data, right, we have, depending on the bank, we could have up to 20 years of information. Some banks are shorter, some banks are longer, right? So here you can see that it's actually quite a long history of information. Okay. What is useful to know is a few components here. This is a 12 months data. It's an unqualified statement, which means it's a good statement. If you see qualified, that means you need to be a bit more careful, right? A statement that's qualified is not a good statement. A statement that's unqualified is a good statement. Okay. Right. Okay. Now from here, right, you can see that this is in thousands Great Britain pound, right? You can change the format here by clicking on the add and remove column, right? So from here, you have different options. I could say remove all, add a new one, and then I can say that, well, I want the last 2 years in, let's say, US dollars in millions. Okay, I can add them, and I can say that I want to add 2 more years in, let's say, any currency that I see here, right? Let's say I put CNY, and I put again in millions, right? I can add them. So then if I apply this, I would have 4 years of data already in the database, right? So if you can see, the currency is in US dollar and RMB. Yeah, and this is the exchange rate that we use basically. Okay, and here, if you want to dive a bit deeper, again, if you click on this, everything that's underneath will be translated to whatever currency that you see here. Okay, so we make all those translation easily for you. I will now explain a few sections here. You saw that I show you this part, right? And so I'm going to jump in a few things that I think will be interesting, right? Under the balance sheet, some of the data points that people often look at is like, what kind of loans do they have, right? And things like what is the total assets and total liabilities and all that, right? So all these data points are essentially all here. Now, one of the way to find the information is to jump in section by section, right? Or alternatively, you can also type in Control F and find something, right? So if I want to find IFRS, I can get everything that is in IFRS here, right? So for example, here, for many of the European banks, we have this thing, what we call the IFRS 9 disclosure, which talk about the stages of the loans and how they quantify the losses, right? What they consider as non-performing loans. So this is IFRS 9 disclosure that is predominantly depending, right? Since 2018, many banks should follow the IFRS 9 disclosure. So they'll tell you what stages the loans are, right? Whether they are impaired or whether they are performing, right? Expected losses. So this is a standardized way. So you can find many banks with this information, right? But of course, most of the banks, depending what they have, what they publish, right? It all depends on what the bank publish, and we will have the data. Okay. I go back to the part here where there's capital adequacy, and this is something that you know, many banks or rather many analysts and many users are interested, right? What is their capital ratios, right? Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 1 as reported. When they see as reported, it means we take whatever they put in their annual report and we write the number exactly, right? There are some numbers that we calculate or we spread them according to our template, but there are many that whenever you see as reported, that means we do not make any adjustment. It is what it is, right? It's what written in the annual report, we put them in. Right. So this is capital adequacy. Right? If I scroll down, again, all the ratios are here. So you can see that there are a number of them with NA. The reason is our template is detailed, right? Our template is very detailed. However, not all banks will publish those information. Okay, so it depends what the bank publish, right? And we will put in whatever that is published into the solution itself. Okay, so as you scroll down, you can see that the top part here, the crumb breads or the breadcrumbs actually has made some will change, right? So at least we'll tell you which section now I'm in liquidity. Previously, I was in earnings, right? So again, if you need to use all these data points, you can use it. Okay. So this is what you can get from the global detail format. And if I jump into the national format, right, the data item is different. Okay. Let it load for a while. Okay. You can see that here, the way we organize is still the same, right? Income statement, balance sheet, everything is there. But within each section, it's extremely detailed, right? It's even more granular. Okay. Now, any of the data here, you can click on the export function to Excel. Yeah. So then you can export it for the usage. Okay. I like to just highlight this number here. All right, all the numbers on the left, these are the accounting codes. This number is very useful when you do your research because this number will point out to the exact line item, and you can do the settings here. But perhaps later I'll show you how you can do the settings in order to see the numbers, right? Because it depends how you all are set up in the university. Okay. So this is the financials. Okay. Very often you may say that I want to do a quick peer comparison, right? So here we will pull essentially any banks, right? I can use a standard peer group, closest 10 banks, right? Based on total asset for the last available year. So you can make changes here. You want everything within a country or international. Okay, and I say, okay. And here we can do the median, the standard, the average deviation, and all the comparison. So the number here represents the ranking. So HSBC is ranked number the third one among this peer group. Okay. And likewise, you can see the analysis for all the different data points. Okay. Very often, the ratings is an important component. So the rating by Moody's, by S&P, by Fitch, they're all here, right? So you can see all the ratings and the rating history. Okay. So everything that you can see here is all available, right? All the ratings here. And of course, there are some graphs that you can utilize, right? So for example, you want to see the ratings of the bank, right, over the years in a graphical manner. So there's something you can see quite easily. Okay. The other one is the country rating, right? So each country has their own rating by the main rating agency as well. Okay. So here are the ratings by Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. In this case, will be on UK. You can get rating announcement, right? If there's any announcement with it, you can get that. Okay, there is some economics data, right? So we are changing a bit of the things here, but you'll be able to see some of the key high-level economics data, okay, from the database itself, GDP. We have the full set of economics data if the client needs it, okay. Okay. If the bank is listed in a stock exchange, then we will have the necessary data. I think in the case of HSBC, is the HSBC Holdings. I think that is the rated entity, right? So if you go to HSBC Holdings, you can see the stock information. Okay. We have all the directors and managers of this, the people, right? So we update, like for example, this Colin William Bell is the CEO since February this year. Okay. Every time you see a flag, it means that these are names that is potentially a politically exposed person, or it could be have a sanctions tag to it, right? Or enforcement tag to it, right? It's a risk, what we call a risk relevant name, right? Okay, so here you can click on this, for example, and you will see that Steve Connor, okay, he's actually a politically exposed person. In fact, there are two Steve Connor, and you have to decide which one is which. Okay. I believe for HSBC, this is the one, right? Steve Connor. Okay, close this. Current directors, previous directors, right? And also the auditors. Auditors are also quite useful when you do your analysis, right? So of course, most of these big banks, they all will use any of the big four, right? KPMG, PwC, Ernst & Young, and all that. We will tell you who essentially, well, I think maybe this is more of a the bankers, right? Which is a central bank. Yeah. The other component that is very useful is the ownership side, right? So here we could tell you under geographic footprint, okay, how many companies are in the corporate group. So we know that for HSBC, the headquarters is here, right? And they have many operations in different parts of the world. Okay, so this is a good way to analyze a bank geographical footprint. Okay, and this is in a graphical manner. Of course, you can always see that in a table form. Okay. Now, other things, beneficial owner. Often it refers to a person. So if let's say it's a private bank, there's a good chance you can find a beneficial owner or PO. Here you often will find the company here, other beneficial owner. Okay. The way we present information here, you can see that this is controlling these are the current shareholders, right? So we have all the shareholders, the main shareholders of this HSBC bank, right? And of course, you can click on this and you can go into the HSBC bank holdings, right? So you can see that we can jump different ways from here. Okay. Now, there's a few graphical format you can see rather here. So if I look at the ownership structure here, I can see how HSBC PLC Bank is linked to the HSBC Bank holdings, right? You can see how this is linked up, okay? Now, when I click on the HSBC Holdings PLC, right? I click on the ownership structure, I would be able to see how HSBC Holdings is linked, right? So there are many funds who own HSBC Holdings, BlackRock, and all that, right? So we can see all of this. Depending on your subscription, we have other ways to view the data. Here we have this thing called Shareholders by key rank, right? And this is a very good visualization tool, right? And here we allow you to visualize how many percent, right? So if I put here 2%, so what this means is that if I want to filter all the banks that has at least a 2% shareholding with this, right, it can be shown quite easily. But if I want to filter only banks with, let's say, a bigger shareholding, right, at least 5%, it will show less. So this is a very nice graph, you know, to show the shareholders and the subsidiaries of the HSBC. It allows you to do analysis, right? Who owns the bank ultimately, right? So earlier we saw with the financials, all the credit risk, right? And here, this is more qualitative, where we talk about the shareholders information. Now, obviously, it's going to take some time to load because HSBC has a lot of subsidiaries and shareholders. Okay. Likewise, to see the subsidiaries, you can also just click on the left-hand side here, and it will show you a list of all their subsidiaries, which again is a big number because we are looking at HSBC, right? If you look at a smaller bank, then obviously you're going to have less subsidiaries. So this is all the subsidiaries of HSBC. Okay. And you can always, every time you see a triangle, you can always click on this, and then it can open up, you know, the details as well. Okay. So this is the information that you can see here. I talked about earlier the research. So the research data, you can get the research information here. Let's wait for it to load. Okay, so here you can find all the research that is that we have created. Now, research by Moody's Investor Service. This is different, right? This is the kind of research that there is a paid service. I don't think you all subscribe to this. So this is used by investors or people who are analyzing banks, right? I don't think you will use this set of information, okay? But just for your reference that we do, the Moody's Investor Services actually will rate all these. Now, this is a typical, I would say, a good introduction to the kind of data that you can find in Bank Focus, okay? Whatever you see here, you can export to Excel or PDF, okay? Right? So we have seen that you can export financials in Excel. You can also export the report in PDF. You can change currency, right? So there's something that we look at earlier on, right? For the financials, you can change the currency. You can look at interim data. So this is within a company report. Okay. What I think is also useful for all of you is when you need to pull a set of information for a group of banks. Okay, so this is what we see for a bank, right? Now we will go into searching for a group of banks instead of looking at entity by itself. So we can click on this Start Again button. So we'll refresh everything. So here, let me explain a few things, right? A few search criteria that you can use. So you can search by, obviously, by the name of the bank. So if you've got 3 banks you want to look at, maybe Bank ABC, you know, or whatever, or Winglong Banks, DBS Bank, HSBC, you can search that. You can search by the unique identifier of each bank that I showed you earlier, or the LEI. You can search by all the banks in a certain country. Okay. You can search by banks that fulfill a few key financials items. So for example, right, I want to look at banks that is, instead of revenue, maybe I want to look at total assets, right? So maybe I want to look at total assets of the banks, okay, that is growing at 2% to 3%, okay, or of a certain value, right? So maybe I want total asset with at least, well, here you can see million, so I use billion here. So I want to find all banks with a total asset of at least 50 billion, right? So that means I want to look at bigger banks in the world. So now within our database, we found that there's about 1,459 banks with an asset of at least 50 billion. Next, I may say that I want to look at all the banks from a certain country. Okay, so I can say that I want, let's say China. Okay, I want, let's say Japan. And I want, let's say US. Okay, right, United States of America. So let's say I only want entities from here. So then I have 635 banks. If you see, the way we do is a Boolean search, right? 1 and 2 and 3. So all the active banks that have assets minimum of 50 billion US dollars and located in these 3 countries. And I have 635 of them, right? So this is how you can build search criteria, is filters, right? So you build one by one. And from here, we can say view results. So you can see that these are all the data, all the banks. In this case, I also include some insurance company, right? If I did do all the entities that fulfill my conditions. Okay, they are consolidated. They are from different countries. What is useful, I think, especially for research, is the ability to, again, look at the things that you're interested to see. So for example, I'm interested in the ranking of, so let's say I remove everything, right? And I'm interested in the bank ranking, right? By assets. I'm interested in, let's say, the total assets, right? And I want to look at the last 3 years of total assets, okay, in billions. You can do that. Okay. So depending on what I want to see, I may say that I also want to look at return on equity, right? So again, I could add the data. So I can add all this information that I want. So anything that mix financials, I can also mix, for example, okay, any of the shareholders information that I want, right? So I put global ultimate owner, name, Okay, and I say apply. So this will allow me to create a template that fulfills all my requirements. Okay, ranking or assets, right? Total assets, return on equity, who is the ultimate owner. So we can see a lot of the Chinese banks are owned by China, right? The government essentially of China. Now here, something worth to learn is from here, you can again export to Excel, right? So let's say I export here, that means you're exporting just all the value, right? And they say current view. And let's say instead of all entities, I just want to export from 1 to 50. So export. So what this means is that it's just going to export the first 50 banks in this list, right? And of course, you can wait for the download, or you can go to another. We have a download area that you can use. Okay, then that's it, right? So this is, you can do this. What is useful here is you have successfully modified the view. Save as, right? So save as essentially means test 1, for example. What this means is, once I've saved, if you look at this here, I have different view. So different view will show me different things. So now I have a view that shows on the few new variables that I've just selected. I have previously saved a view on ratings, right? And so if this is my view, again, I can pull out all the company that's rated by the different rating agency. So I can do several things with all these, what we call a list format. Okay. Yeah. So this is something that I think is worth playing around, because by exporting the data, you can do it. Now, another thing that you can do is also save the entities. There's a few things. You can save all the banks, which is this 650 banks, as a set. That means, imagine you're doing a research, right? And you have already say that these 600 banks are your banks that you want to look again the next time. You can then say, save it as a new record, and you give it a name. Okay. There's another kind of search, which is what we call a search strategy. So here again, I can serve search strategy. The difference is this: saving a search strategy means this is a search strategy. That means all banks more than at least 50 billion in total asset located in these countries. So what this means is that if tomorrow there's a bank in Japan, right, that previously has 50 billion assets, but in the latest financial year, it has dropped to 40 billion, then that bank will no longer appear in this list, right? So this is again something that that we can fine tune. So search strategy is different, right? Every time you load the search, the number of banks could be different. Whereas saving as a bank set, every time you load the bank, the number of banks will be the same, right? So here you can say load a search, right? Or load an entity set, right? So you see previously I've saved an entity set called GSIP, right? So this is all the 30 companies that I have under the GSIP. Okay, so this is just a little bit of functionality that you can see here. A few things that maybe here I wouldn't go into too much details, but there's some configuration that we can do, right? Depending on how you want to do your research. So if you have a question next time when you do your research and you're not finding the data, you can look for us. We can help you with some of these research. some of this configuration. Now, the export function, right? Just now I export the file. So if you export a big file, it may take longer, right? So you can leave this again for, it will be in the database for 14 days. So you can always download here as well. Okay, so this is the export functionality. The other, probably the last thing that I think I like to show you is here. We have the research. So now we are at the company level, right? But we also have the research. And under the research, okay, you can find, for example, the research that we have. Under the source here, you should select Moody's Analytics Bank Focus Research. Click on this. And you have access to all the previous research reports. Okay, so this is a research report sorted by date, right? 2018, 2019, right? All the way to the latest one that we do, right? Which is 2021, right? And so here, if you click on this, you're able to look at the research reports, something like this, like what I said, like what I show you here. Let me make it a bit bigger. Okay, and let me share this research report, right? So this is what it has, right? It's written just last month. Okay. Chinese bank profitability ratios unchanged as operating expenses outpace revenue, right? So we explain the research content, right? All the different sections. So this can give you some inspirations, right? And explaining the data point. Okay, right, some of this, and at the end of that research, right, we can actually explain to you what is a high-level research methodology. Okay, these are the few data points. Essentially, it's a camel ratios, right, that we talked about earlier, for which period and which banks that they look at. And of course, if you look at this research, if you have any question, you can always look for us and we can answer those questions. Okay. All right. Let me stop here, right? I think we have looked through a lot of the bank focus solutions already, right? I think there's a lot that we have seen in the past, I don't know, hour or so. So I'll pause here if you all have any more questions. If not, then we can also stop here.
是的，谢谢 Benny。然后同学们有什么问题也欢迎提出，在对话框打上问题或者是开语音都可以的。然后我发一下今天的 PPT 给大家。大家可以下载。然后那个视频的话，我们会过几天会放在我们的 YouTube 跟哔哩哔哩上面的账号，大家就可以重温一下。
OK， 好的。那个 PPT 我们有一份新的，待会儿 Aaron 会发给你。
哦，好啊。
OK， 那如果是没什么问题，我们今天也是可以结束。当然，如果你们有时间试一下 Bank Focus， 还有其他问题也是可以下次来问我们，这个没问题的。是的。
那如果大家没什么问题的话，今天的培训就到这边哦。那我也跟大家宣传一下，我们下周2会有一场是关于 Data Stream 的培训，也欢迎大家来参加。那今天谢谢大家的参与，那谢谢 Benny， 谢谢大家，拜拜。
好，谢谢大家，谢谢，再见，拜拜。
拜拜。